It's always going to be a quartz crystal, and it's always going to have its own internal order of motion. But then we come to the plant kingdom. Now we can visibly see movement. And we see that plants at least move in two major ways. They put their roots down to get water. They also put their roots down to stabilize the plant so that it doesn't get blown over in the wind. It seems to be purposeful, that movement down into the earth, doesn't it? And then the plant moves in the other direction. It moves up to get the light of the sun, to get food from the sun. Now, if we come to the animal kingdom, there is a tremendous variety of motion, isn't there? All kinds of movements of all kinds of creatures. And now they're much more free, aren't they? The rocks couldn't do much. The plants a little bit more. The animals have a great deal more freedom. And we can see different types of meaning in the motion, and sometimes we don't know what the motion is all about. I think the species know, but we don't. Now we come to the human kingdom, and the mind reels at the possibilities. Let's take something like body language. If we're talking to a friend, and as we're talking to the friend, we're having a nice conversation, very pleasant, and then we bring up a particular subject, and our friend folds the arms across the front. A motion. That usually means you've hit a bump, and you'd probably better back off at that minute until you can straighten it out and the arms relax. Not necessarily every folded arm means that, but that can mean that. If you see someone walking across the lawn or across the sidewalk, see them outside, walking along, and you've never seen them before even. If they're walking very, very slowly, and they're drooping their head down, you would probably think, and you would probably be right, that either they're in a meditative mood, or they're very sad, or something of the kind. You would certainly not assume that they were jubilantly happy, would you? Because the way they walk reveals something about the way they feel.
When I was younger, she'd come to me in dreams.
Music is another obvious example of motion. Indeed, our whole experience of music is motion-based. Every sound we hear is a vibratory quality, for it is through vibration of the air that musical sounds are carried to and heard through the mechanisms of the inner ear. Different musical instruments produce different vibrations. If we add other vibratory factors, such as tempo, rhythm, harmony, and melody, we begin to see the many ways in which music as motion is a powerful force in our lives.
And no one could ever tell me, and I don't think anyone could ever tell you, that there isn't a vast difference in meaning between acid rock and Mozart. There's a tremendous difference of meaning. No matter which we like or whether we like both, no moral judgments, it means something different, doesn't it? Now, our whole nature really is in one sense a vibratory state at all the different levels. And motion all through, inwardly as well as outwardly, has meaning. All conscious motion, I think, has meaning. Even if I reach up to scratch my head, I've done it for a purpose, haven't I? We talk with our hands to emphasize something. We have the body motion, as I said. But also there's unconscious motion inwardly. The heart is beating for its purpose, carrying out its job. The liver, the kidneys, the blood, all moving in their own way for their own purposes for the sake of the body as a whole. Now let's look at our emotions. We've fairly well established, I hope, that motion may indeed have purpose and meaning and order in the different kingdoms of nature. But what about inwardly? Because motion is there also, we suggest. Certainly the Theosophical philosophy insists upon it. Let's just take two emotions with which we are all unfortunately familiar, and then some more pleasant ones. Anxiety and depression. We've all experienced those two at least a little bit in our lives. I hope not much. If we had to say that anxiety was either fast or slow, I think most of you would say it feels fast. And if we had to say that depression was either fast or slow, I think most of you would say it feels slow. Now let's take two other emotions. Let's take enthusiasm and serenity. And again, if I ask, how does serenity feel? You would most likely respond, slow. And how does enthusiasm feel? You would most likely respond, fast. So we can think of our emotional states in terms of motion as well. But note well, anxiety and enthusiasm are both fast, but we'd sure rather have enthusiasm than anxiety. Depression and serenity are both slow, but we'd rather have serenity than depression. So there's something else at work here, perhaps rhythm, perhaps all kinds of things. But it is nonetheless fascinating to see that inwardly, subjectively, we can see our emotions in terms of motion. Now the mind also can be thought of in terms of motion. We use expressions in our language like, that individual is very slow to change their mind. That's when we're being kind. They may be stubborn. We say someone has a very quick mind. Terms that are referred to really from motion, aren't they? Quick, fast, movement. We say an idea flashes on our mind. Again, implicit in that is the idea of motion. We talk about the tidal wave of human thought. Again, phrases that suggest motion in the mind. Now, in coming to a close for this session, I'd like to go back for a moment to that first fundamental proposition, which must never really be forgotten. That idea of the intrinsic unity of all, that everything really is differentiated states of one indivisible reality. If that is so, then surely everything must affect everything else. Isn't that reasonable? Because all is one fabric in a sense. Therefore, a tug at one part of the fabric will affect some other part of the fabric. We can see this at least in our own personal nature. And indeed, there's a lot of evidence out in the scientific world that that's true now. But let's just stick to our own personal experience. Let's take first a negative example and then a positive. If I am worried about something, that's a mental state, isn't it? It's an idea that bothers me. A concept, something bothers me, a thought about something, a fear. That idea, projecting into the future, afraid of something that's going to happen, which I have conceptualized, will affect my feelings, won't it? It'll make me very anxious. And if I continue to do that in a pattern over and over again, not if I just do it for a few minutes or a day or two or a week maybe, but if I do that month after month, year after year, I can almost guarantee an ulcer or a heart attack or something of the kind will occur. The mind affects the feelings affect the body. And it can do it in a positive or a negative way, because a joyful person does it the other way around. Now let's take the happy one. Let's say we're sitting along, not too energetic, we are a little bored maybe with life at the minute, and we start to think about some project that we've been dealing with, and we suddenly get a creative idea. Wow, that's fascinating. Right away, our emotions are joyful, and we've got energy. We get up and feel like we want to do something. So an idea in our mind can affect us in both ways. Now I think I'd like to have us think for a minute again about this idea of the internal patterns of energy. Whether we're depressed, anxious, joyful, our inner state really can be thought of in terms of motion. And I think it helps a great deal if we do think of it that way. If when we feel in a way that we would rather not like to feel, if we remember that no one got in there with a mixmaster and did it for us. We did it all by ourselves. Now, do you see that there's great hope in this? Because if I have done it all by myself, I can also undo it all by myself. So we can now refer back to that idea in the secret doctrine that the universe and all therein is formed by accelerated motion set into activity by the ever-to-be unknown power. And what is that ever-to-be unknown power? It's that first fundamental proposition, that unspeakable reality in which you and I are also rooted. If that's true, you see, we have the possibility, I don't say it's easy, we have the possibility of retreating into that background state that we are, and from there, recreating the foreground within us, using that creative power of motion to actually change our lives.